When Mom leaves, call the locksmith. Change the locks. I want new keys before she gets back. That single sentence sliced through the laughter sharper than any knife on the table. My hand froze mid-air, frosting knife hovering above the chocolate cake. Around me the restaurant hummed, glasses clinking, birthday candles flickering, my daughter's smile stretched into something sweet and poisonous. My name is Frances Delaney. I'm 69 years old, and on my 70th birthday my only child tried to lock me out of my own home. But what they didn't know was, the house they wanted wasn't mine anymore. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, especially by someone who once held your hand and called you mom. Because what happened that day didn't just break my heart, it tore open 40 years of sacrifice, silence, and trust I thought could never be used against me. And it all started long before that birthday lunch. I wasn't always the kind of woman who sat quietly through betrayal. There was a time when silence meant survival, not surrender. I was 29 when my husband Patrick died in a work accident at the Bayview docks. He'd been an electrical engineer, careful and methodical, but one loose wire on a rainy afternoon took him from me in less than a heartbeat. They called it a tragic workplace incident. I called it the moment everything I believed in collapsed. That night I sat on the kitchen floor of our rented apartment, my 3-year-old daughter Rachel asleep in my lap, her thumbs still wet with tears. The refrigerator hummed like a low, cruel reminder that life would keep moving even if mine had stopped. I counted out what I had left: $37 and an overdue electric bill. The next morning I went to Bayview Regional Medical Center and begged for a job. Any job. I didn't have a nursing license back then, just 2 years of community college and a will that refused to break. The head nurse looked at me with pity, then handed me a clipboard. "We can start you on night sanitation," she said. "Low pay, long hours. You'll clean more blood than you ever thought you could stomach." I said yes before she finished. That was my first act of defiance against despair. For years, Rachel slept in the hospital break room while I wiped floors that smelled like bleach and grief. I'd watch the nurses rush down the corridors, their shoes whispering against linoleum, their hands steady, even when their eyes looked hollow. Something inside me wanted that steadiness, that control. So I started studying again, stealing minutes between shifts to read anatomy flashcards under the flicker of vending machine lights. I didn't know it then, but those sleepless nights would shape everything that came later, including the woman who'd one day stand up to her own daughter in court. When I finally earned my nursing license at 34, the hospital held a small ceremony in the staff lounge. My supervisor clapped me on the back and said, "You've got grit, Delaney. Not everyone survives the night shifts." I smiled, but inside I thought survive. Survival had been my only way of living for years. I moved us into a small duplex near the coast, peeling paint, leaky roof, but it was ours. Rachel grew up watching me juggle double shifts, paperwork, and exhaustion. Every morning I'd braid her hair and whisper, "We're going to make it, baby. Just you watch." By the time she turned 10, I had saved enough for a down payment on a plot of land just outside Savannah near the marshes. The real estate agent laughed when I told him I planned to build there. "Ma'am, it floods half the year. Ain't no place for a single woman to start." I told him I'd rather fight water than depend on anyone again. The house took 4 years, weekends filled with hammering blueprints spread on the hood of an old car, and Rachel playing in the mud while I argued with contractors who thought the widow Delaney didn't know what she was doing. But brick by brick, nail by nail, it rose, a small wooden home facing the sea. Every corner smelled of salt and effort. When we moved in, Rachel was 14 and full of teenage indifference. She barely remembered the nights we ate ramen noodles in the hospital cafeteria or the years I worked through Christmas. To her, the house was just normal. She couldn't see that the walls were built from my exhaustion or that each tile in the kitchen represented a shift I'd survived. I didn't blame her. Children are supposed to forget what their parents suffered, but forgetting has a price. The older Rachel got, the more she looked at the house as something owed to her. At 16, she asked if the title had both our names. I laughed softly, thinking it was a joke. "Sweetheart, when you build your own, you can put any name you want on it." She didn't laugh back. By the time she graduated college, she had already changed. Her laughter became sharper, her hugs shorter. She married David, a man who could charm anyone with a handshake and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked in financial consulting, which, as I later learned, meant he was very good at making other people's money disappear. Still, I wanted to believe the best. Rachel told me they'd help manage my retirement finances. I thought it was sweet that maybe she finally wanted to care for me the way I had cared for her. But small things began to shift. Rachel started bringing up my age more often casually at first. "Mom, you really shouldn't be climbing ladders anymore. Then, you know it's dangerous living alone by the coast. What if you fall?" One evening she left a stack of brochures on my kitchen counter. "Just for you to look at," she said. They were glossy pamphlets for assisted living facilities, all with smiling seniors and pastel walls. I laughed it off, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. Around that same time, David began asking about my house value. "The market's hot," he said over dinner one Sunday. "You could sell and live off the interest comfortably. We could help invest the money. You'd never have to worry about bills again." I told him I wasn't worried about bills. I was worried about people who think they know what's best for me. He laughed, pretending not to take it personally, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes' calculation. I didn't realize then that they were already making plans, that every friendly visit, every dinner invitation was just another step towards something darker. One night, while cleaning up after a family dinner, I overheard them in the living room. Their voices were low, but I knew that tone the one nurses use when delivering bad news gently. Rachel said she's 70 next month. "It's time to think about what happens next." David replied, "I've already talked to someone. We can file for temporary guardianship if she shows signs of confusion. Just a formality, really." The word guardianship hit me like a slap. I remember standing there with a wet dish towel in my hand, my heart thudding so loud I thought they could hear it. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window listening to the waves crash against the shore, realizing the sound that once comforted me now sounded like warning drums. The next morning I made coffee and went through every file, every receipt, every document I had. For 40 years I'd built my life around that house, but suddenly I knew if I wanted to keep my freedom I had to let go of it first. I called Lila Green, an old neighbor turned real estate agent. "Lila, I need to sell my house." Quietly. No family involved. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Fran, are you sure?" "As sure as I've ever been." I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't tell anyone. While she planned my future, I was planning my escape. I didn't know it back then, but this decision, the one that broke her illusion of control, would be the spark that burned everything down. Selling the house wasn't easy, not emotionally, not logistically, and certainly not quietly. Every nail, every photograph in that place carried a memory. The walls held echoes of lullabies, arguments, and long nights when the only sound was the ocean wind rattling the porch screens. But I had learned long ago that survival sometimes means cutting out what you love before it poisons you. Lila handled everything discreetly. She found a retired couple from Charleston, cash buyers who loved the sea view and the soul of the place. I signed the papers with hands that didn't tremble until the very last page. When the ink dried, so did the illusion that the house was my safety net. Freedom, I realized, often comes disguised as loss. I moved into a small apartment at Seaside Court Towers, a quiet, sunlit complex overlooking the marina. The first night there I slept without checking the locks twice. The second night I realized I didn't need to whisper goodnight to the shadows anymore. It wasn't home yet, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was secret. A week later, Rachel called. Her voice had that honeyed sharpness I'd come to recognize. "Mom, we were thinking, why don't you come stay with us for a few weeks? You've been so isolated lately." "I'm fine, honey. I just needed a change." "A change? What kind of change? Just a different view?" She went quiet for a moment, then asked, "You're still at the house, right?" I smiled into the phone. "Of course." It was the first lie I'd told my daughter in years, and it tasted bitter but necessary. 3 days later, David showed up unannounced. I saw him through the security camera of my new building, standing at the front desk with his usual smug grin. The doorman called up to confirm, and I told him to say, "No one by that name lives here." David left after a few minutes, confusion twisting his perfect hairline. That's when I knew they were already watching. Within a week, I started receiving mail at my old address letters marked "Return to Sender." The forwarding request hadn't gone through, or worse, someone had canceled it. I filed for a P.O. box and began keeping a log of every coincidence. Old habits die hard. Once a nurse, always a documenter. Then came the birthday lunch. Rachel insisted on reserving a table at the waterfront bistro, the same place Patrick and I used to go before he died. "You'll love it, Mom," she said. "Nostalgia's good for you." I should have known. Nostalgia is only comforting when it isn't being weaponized. The lunch started pleasant enough soft music, the smell of butter and shrimp in the air, David pouring wine like a game show host. But halfway through the meal, I excused myself to the restroom. That's when I heard it. "When Mom leaves, call the locksmith. Change the locks. I want new keys before she gets back." Rachel's voice, flat, cold. My blood ran like ice water. When I walked back, they were smiling again, pretending nothing had happened. I sat down slowly, forcing my hands to stay still, and cut the cake. Each slice felt like a countdown. That night I called Naomi, my niece's daughter, a young law student who had always admired my old-school orderliness. She picked up on the first ring. "Aunt Fran, you okay? I need to ask you something." Hypothetically, what would happen if someone tried to declare an elderly parent incompetent? Her tone shifted instantly. "Who's trying to do that to you?" I hesitated. "Just answer the question." She explained how easy it was to file, how the courts often err on the side of protecting the elderly, even if the claim was manipulative. By the end of the call, I'd made up my mind they wouldn't get the chance. I gathered everything: medical records, property documents, financial logs, and stored copies in a safety deposit box. Then I did something I'd never imagined. I visited Dr. Howard Ellis, an old colleague who'd switched from neurology to forensic psychology. He smiled when he saw me. "You always said you'd never come see me unless the world ended." "It's not the world," I said quietly. "Just the family part." He ran a full cognitive assessment. I passed every test from memory recall to problem solving. When he handed me the report, he said, "Fran, you're sharper than most 40-year-olds." I asked him to notarize it. He looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "Insurance, exactly." I didn't know it then, but that report would become the sword they'd impale themselves on later. Months passed. Rachel called less often, her messages shorter, clipped. "Hope you're well, call me." Then one day a thick envelope arrived from the county court. Inside was a petition for temporary guardianship, my daughter claiming I was displaying signs of cognitive decline and poor financial judgment. Poor financial judgment. That's what she called selling my own house. I remember sitting at my kitchen counter, the afternoon light cutting through the blinds like bars. My throat felt dry, but my mind was clear, crystal clear. I called Naomi again. "They've filed," I said. "Then we'll file back," she replied. Together we began building the defense. Naomi was relentless, pulling case precedents, interviewing witnesses. She found Lila, who confirmed I'd handled every part of the house sale independently. She even tracked down Dr. Ellis for a sworn statement. Meanwhile, Rachel's narrative grew slicker. She told neighbors I was struggling with early dementia, that she was only doing what any loving daughter would. The town nodded sympathetically because everyone loves a dutiful child. No one questions the villain if she smiles sweetly enough. The first hearing was scheduled for early fall. I spent the week before it in near silence, journaling everything. The night before court, I looked out at the sea from my apartment balcony. The air smelled like rain and salt, same as the night Patrick died. I whispered, "Patrick, if you can hear me, I'm not letting her take what we built." The next morning, I walked into the courthouse in a pressed navy suit and low heels. Rachel was already there, wearing soft beige, the color of innocence. David leaned in close to whisper something, and she laughed. That sound used to make me happy. Now it only made me colder. Naomi touched my arm. "You ready?" I nodded. More than ever. As I took my seat in front of the judge, I realized something: I wasn't the woman they thought I was anymore. The tired mother, the quiet widow, she was gone. What remained was a woman who'd built a house from her own two hands and could damn well rebuild her life without permission. And what they didn't know was that before they ever stepped into that courtroom, I already had every piece of evidence I needed, neatly logged, time-stamped, and waiting to burn their lies down to ash. The morning of the first hearing, I noticed how quiet the courthouse was. Not solemn quiet in the way hospital corridors fall silent before bad news. You could hear every heel click, every shuffle of papers. I sat at the table beside Naomi, my heart steady but my fingers tracing the edge of the folder in front of me. Inside were the documents that told the real story: the house sale receipts, Dr. Ellis's notarized report, and the logbook I'd been keeping since the day I heard my daughter's plan. Rachel arrived 10 minutes late. Of course she did. She walked in with David at her side wearing cream and pearls, her hair pulled back the same way I used to wear mine when she was little, a perfect imitation of control. When she saw me, she smiled like she was greeting a patient instead of her mother. "Mom," she whispered, leaning close before we began. "You don't have to make this harder than it is. Just agree to let us help." "Help," I said softly. "That what you call it?" Her smile didn't falter. "You're tired. Everyone can see it. This is for your own good." I looked her straight in the eye. "Rachel, I built a house out of nothing. If I can do that, I can take care of myself." Naomi touched my wrist gently. "Don't engage," she murmured. But Rachel's eyes lingered on me, searching for weakness. When the hearing started, Rachel spoke first. She painted a picture so gentle, so persuasive that even I almost believed it for a second. "My mother has always been strong," she began, her voice trembling at all the right moments. "But lately she's become forgetful. She sold her home without consulting anyone. She's refused medical advice. I'm only trying to protect her from being taken advantage of." "Protect me, from her maybe." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I stayed silent. Naomi took notes furiously, occasionally underlining something 3 times. Then the judge turned to me. "Mrs. Delaney, do you wish to respond?" I stood. My knees didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. "Your Honor, I've spent 40 years keeping records for lives that hung by a thread. When my husband died, I raised a child alone. I've never missed a payment, never lost a document, and I can tell you the dosage and schedule of every medication I've taken in the last 10 years. If that's confusion, then the world's gone mad." Rachel's face stiffened. David leaned back, his jaw tightening. The judge asked for Dr. Ellis's evaluation next. When Naomi handed it over, Rachel tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, that's not recent. It's from 3 weeks ago," Naomi said smoothly. "Signed, sealed, and notarized." The judge read quietly, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "Mrs. Delaney, according to this, your cognitive functions are above average for your age. Is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am." Rachel's lips parted slightly. For the first time, she didn't have a script. But the real battle didn't end there. Over the next month, the tension thickened like humidity before a storm. Rachel started calling neighbors from our old community, spreading whispers that I'd fallen under bad influence. David hinted that Naomi was manipulating me for inheritance. Every word they spread came back to me eventually. Savannah's a small place. Gossip doesn't need wings when it has coffee tables. I didn't fight their words. I documented them. Screenshots, dates, times. The nurse in me knew evidence is stronger than emotion. Then one afternoon, I received a notice Rachel's legal team had requested a psychological reevaluation, this time from a neutral expert of their choosing. I called Naomi immediately. "This is intimidation," she said, her voice crisp. "You don't have to agree." "I will," I said. "Why?" "Because I have nothing to hide, and I want them to watch themselves lose." So I went. The evaluator, a younger psychologist with kind eyes, asked me questions about memory money, even my daily routine. I answered each one calmly, sometimes with more detail than she expected. When it was over, she smiled faintly. "You're the most organized interviewee I've ever had." "That's because my daughter thinks I'm losing my mind," I replied. By the time I left, the sky had turned gray and heavy with rain. I stood under the awning, breathing in the damp air. It reminded me of the day I buried Patrick. Same smell, same ache, same quiet determination to keep standing. That night, I opened my logbook again. I wrote in neat cursive day 46. She still underestimates me. A week later, Naomi called with a tone that was both grim and triumphant. "They slipped up," she said. "Rachel's lawyer accidentally sent us a draft memo. They were discussing potential evidence of confusion, including a statement that doesn't exist." "What kind of statement?" I asked. "Apparently you told a neighbor that you miss your husband and wish to go home. They're twisting it into suicidal ideation." I laughed softly, disbelief mixing with something darker. "They're fabricating grief now," Naomi sighed. "We'll expose it, Aunt Fran. But you should prepare yourself. It's going to get uglier before it gets better." She was right. The next escalation came when I received a welfare check from Adult Protective Services. A woman showed up at my door, kind, professional, but probing. "We received a report that you may be living unsafely," she said. I invited her in, offered her coffee, and handed her my perfectly organized folders, medical forms, property deeds, even a recent photo of me doing yoga. She left half an hour later with an apologetic smile. Before she walked out, she said quietly, "It's always the ones who seem to have it all together that someone tries to silence." I stood by the window watching her car disappear. The world outside looked calm again, but I knew better. Calm in my experience was just the moment before the next monitor alarm went off. I didn't know it yet, but the storm Rachel had started was about to reach the kind of breaking point no one could predict, not even her. The storm broke 2 weeks later. Not outside the skies over Savannah stayed stubbornly blue, but inside my life, where calm had become a lie I could no longer afford to believe. It began with a letter. A thick official envelope from the county courthouse, stamped emergency petition for temporary guardianship expedited review. Rachel had filed again. This time she'd added new evidence, alleged financial mismanagement, and increased confusion. I could almost hear her voice dictating it, soft, reasonable, convincing. I drove straight to Naomi's office. She looked up from her desk when I arrived, her brow furrowing the instant she saw the envelope. "They're doubling down," she said. "They must think you're scared enough to fold." I set my purse down, slow and deliberate. "Then they still don't know me." The hearing was scheduled for that Friday. 2 days before, I decided to pay a visit to Dr. Ellis. His office still smelled like cedar and disinfectant, like the past had been preserved in glass. He looked up from his desk when I walked in. "Frances," he said softly, "you look like you've come straight from a battlefield." "In a way, I have." He leaned forward. "I heard about the second filing. You need to understand something. They're not just after control. They're after narrative. They want to rewrite you while you're still alive." I nodded. "Then let's make sure the story's documented." He pulled a folder from his drawer, copies of our first evaluation, an updated letter confirming my mental fitness, and a notarized statement of independence. "You'll need witnesses," he said. "People who've seen you living alone, managing your affairs." "Already have them." "Who? Lila, Ruth Ann, and the building manager." He smiled. "Of course you do." The night before the hearing, I received a voicemail from Rachel. I played it twice before deleting it. "Mom," she said, her tone half fragile, half threatening. "Please don't make this uglier than it has to be. We're trying to save you from yourself. Don't embarrass me tomorrow." Embarrass her. That was the line that finally burned through me. Friday came with a stillness that felt like anesthesia, numbing, deceptive. The courtroom was smaller this time, more intimate. Only the judge, our lawyers, and a court recorder. Rachel looked flawless as always, her hand resting lightly on David's arm like a possession. Naomi whispered, "You ready?" I nodded. "Let's get it over with." Rachel's lawyer began by painting a picture of gradual decline, complete with selected anecdotes. "Mrs. Delaney has been withdrawing socially. She's made impulsive financial decisions. Her daughter is simply concerned." I leaned toward Naomi. "Impulsive. Selling my house is impulsive now," Naomi whispered back. "Let her hang herself." "Wait." Then Rachel was called to the stand. She did her usual performance, eyes glistening, voice trembling at the right beats. "It's just, I don't recognize my mother anymore. She's not the same woman who raised me." When Naomi cross-examined, her tone turned surgical. "Mrs. Parker, did your mother ever authorize you to manage her finances?" Rachel hesitated. "Well, verbally. Any written authorization?" "No, but did you at any point attempt to access her accounts or property records without consent?" Rachel blinked rapidly. "I was trying to help." Naomi smiled, thin as a blade. "So that's a yes." David shifted in his seat. The first crack had formed. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand without looking at Rachel. My hands didn't shake. My voice came out steady, even calm. I explained my routine bills, paid grocery lists, kept exercise schedules logged. I told the court how I'd sold my own home, paid all fees in cash, and even arranged my medical checkups in advance. Every detail was backed with documentation. Naomi passed the judge a folder, my life bound in order. Rachel's lawyer objected, tried to pivot, but the judge silenced him. "Mrs. Delaney, do you have any evidence of coercion or manipulation from the petitioners?" "Yes, Your Honor." I looked directly at my daughter. "I have a recording." Rachel's face drained of color. Naomi inserted the USB into a laptop. The courtroom filled with familiar voices, Rachel's and David's, discussing the plan to change my locks to manage the paperwork before she realizes what's happening. The silence afterward was absolute. Rachel's lawyer stammered something about context, but the judge's gavel struck once. That will be enough. I didn't look away from my daughter. She avoided my eyes, staring instead at her hands manicured, trembling slightly. The hearing ended quickly after that. The petition was denied with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be filed again without substantial new evidence. But the damage to humankind was already done. That evening I walked along the pier behind my apartment. The sun dipped low, painting the water copper and gold. I thought about Patrick, about the house, about Rachel as a baby sleeping against my shoulder. The ache in my chest wasn't victory, it was something colder. A wound too deep for applause. My phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. You did it. But I knew this wasn't over. Rachel wouldn't just accept defeat. She'd twist the story, turn herself into the victim, me into the cold-hearted mother who chose pride over family. And people would believe her, because charm is louder than truth. So I made a decision that night. If she wanted to destroy my name, she'd have to face the full weight of what she'd done. I had more recordings, more than she knew. I had financial logs tracing money transfers from my accounts she'd tried to help manage. I had her lies in writing, preserved like specimens in glass. I closed my journal and wrote one last line before going to bed. Tomorrow, I stop surviving. Tomorrow, I start fighting. The day of reckoning didn't arrive with thunder. It came with the calm cruelty of a savannah afternoon, the kind that smelled like sea salt and magnolias, where everyone smiled just a bit too politely. The courthouse was larger this time, open to the public. Rachel had requested a full hearing to restore her reputation after the previous denial. David stood beside her again, smug as a man who thought charm could rewrite law. I almost pitied them. Almost. I sat at the respondents' table with Naomi and Dr. Ellis, my folder laid neatly in front of me, tabs, highlights, color-coded notes. The organization wasn't just habit, it was armor. The bailiff called for silence. Judge Mendel entered, a woman whose every step sounded like a verdict. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Rachel. Mrs. Parker, since this is your second filing within 6 months, I expect concrete evidence. Yes, Your Honor, Rachel said, her voice syrup-sweet. I've brought several witnesses and documentation of concerning behaviors. Witnesses, of course. The first was a neighbor from my old street, someone Rachel had been feeding stories to for months. She seemed confused, the woman said. She once asked me what day it was. Naomi leaned over. We'll destroy that in one question, she whispered. When cross-examined, Naomi asked, was this the morning after a hurricane power outage? Yes, I think so. Would you say many people were confused that morning? A beat of silence. Well, yes. No further questions. The courtroom chuckled softly. Then came the so-called financial expert, David's friend, who testified that I'd made erratic investments. Naomi calmly slid a document across the table, my financial summary verified by the bank. Can you confirm, she asked, that Mrs. Delaney's returns have outperformed inflation for the past 3 years? The man cleared his throat. I wasn't aware of that. Then maybe the confusion isn't hers. Rachel's smile cracked. When it was her turn to speak, she did what manipulators do best. She cried beautifully. I love my mother, she said. I just don't want to see her exploited. She's pushing people away. She sold her home. She's hiding money. It's not rational. Her voice quivered at all the right places. Even I could see the jurors' shift softening. It was the same spell she'd used all her life, sweetness masking the blade. But this time I was ready. Naomi rose. Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to present Exhibit 7 amperes. The lights dimmed slightly as she connected the laptop to the projector. On screen appeared the waveform of an audio file. My chest tightened, the one recording they hadn't yet heard. Rachel frowned. What's that? Naomi hit play. David's voice came first. Once she's under guardianship, we can restructure the trust. Then Rachel's good. Just make sure she's too confused to question it. We'll move the funds before she figures it out. The courtroom froze. The judge's gavel struck once. Where did this recording come from? I raised my hand. Your Honor, from my phone. It recorded automatically that day in the restaurant. I didn't even realize until later. Naomi added, chain of custody has been verified. Metadata confirms the file was created on Mrs. Delaney's device on March 18th. Rachel's face drained of color. David tried to speak, but the judge silenced him. Enough. The courtroom doors opened quietly at the back. Dr. Ellis entered holding a folder. If it pleases the court, he said, I'd like to submit an updated report, Mrs. Delaney's cognitive assessment as of this week. She remains fully competent. Judge Mendel scanned the document briefly before nodding. Accepted. Then she turned to Rachel. Mrs. Parker, this recording and report together present a troubling picture. Your petition borders on fraud. Do you wish to continue? Rachel's mouth opened, but no sound came. I looked at her, at the daughter I'd once cradled after nightmares, who used to draw pictures of our old house and call it forever home. There was no victory in my chest, only the quiet ache of recognizing that love could rot when greed took root. David shifted beside her, muttering something about misunderstandings. The judge slammed her gavel. Enough, Mr. Parker. Misunderstanding does not explain premeditation. The court denies the petition with prejudice and refers the matter for further review regarding potential perjury and elder coercion. The gavel fell again. Rachel gasped, a small broken sound that barely escaped her throat. For a moment I saw her facade shatter, no pearls, no polish, just panic. As the courtroom emptied, she turned to me. Mom, she whispered, you didn't have to humiliate me. I met her eyes steady. No, Rachel, I just had to stop you. David stormed out first, leaving her behind. Naomi gathered the documents while Dr. Ellis rested a hand on my shoulder. You handled that like a surgeon, he said quietly. I learned from the best, I replied. Outside, the air hit like release, humid, salt-streaked alive. Reporters hovered by the courthouse steps asking for statements. Naomi shielded me with her arm and guided me through. You don't owe anyone your side, she murmured. I know, I said. The truth already told it. That evening, I sat alone on my balcony overlooking the marina. The sky was streaked in lavender and rust, and the sound of seagulls faded into the hum of night traffic. I poured myself a small glass of wine, not to celebrate but to mark survival. In the distance, church bells rang 6 times. I closed my eyes and exhaled. The bitterness inside me began to dissolve, replaced by something steadier, not joy, not even peace, but the quiet satisfaction of justice finally done. And yet, under the calm, I knew something else was moving. Rachel wasn't finished. Not yet. I'd seen that look before, the kind that hides behind shame until it finds another weapon. But this time, I wasn't the fragile mother she remembered. I was the woman who built her life from ashes, and if she tried again, I'd be ready to burn her lies down all over again. The weeks after the hearing felt like the space between 2 heartbeats, long enough to notice every small thing, short enough that panic didn't have time to settle. Rachel kept her distance. She sent a letter that claimed regret and misunderstanding, but asked for no reconciliation. David predictably disappeared from social pages and dinner invitations. Their friends began to look away when my name came up. That small victory had consequences I hadn't wanted, but had expected people choose sides fast, and reputations once cracked are hard to mend. I moved deliberately into my new routine. Mornings with Ruth Ann and the building women brought laughter, not interrogation. Naomi came by with paperwork and new ideas, a modest foundation to protect elders from predatory conservatorship schemes. You could fund a hotline, she said. You could teach what you learned. The thought warmed me. I had always stitched bandages. Maybe now I could teach others how to stitch their own safety nets. But I wasn't naive. Winning the courtroom didn't erase months of planning Rachel and David had invested. It didn't erase the fact that they'd tried to weaponize people and institutions against me. It only bought time and an opportunity. I began to gather things I hadn't realized might matter. Copies of the recording on separate drives, notarized affidavits from the witnesses. David's network had tried to coach a ledger of suspicious calls and emails Naomi had pulled from. Their accounts with legal warrants. Quiet, tidy piles that read like a manual, how to take down a scheme and how to build a shield. There were small, delicious moments of justice in the months that followed. A letter from a bank investigator informed me that a previously proposed family investment product pitched by David's firm had been put under review. An anonymous tip, the kind Naomi knew how to cultivate, led a regulatory officer to a shell contract that showed kickbacks and referral fees tied to the conservatorship attorney. I didn't celebrate publicly. I kept tea warm for Ruth Ann and painted sunsets in the evenings. The twist I didn't expect was mercy. I received a single page in the mail, one quiet Thursday no return address, one short line "I'm sorry." Signed R. My first impulse was to burn it. Then I set it in a small box next to the photograph of Patrick. Forgiveness felt optional, accountability felt necessary. I filed the note with the other evidence. Maybe one day the note would be useful in a different way. The real plan, the one that would make sure no other old woman lost her house because a child decided entitlement was a birthright, wasn't dramatic. It was slow and legal and boring in the best way. Create education. Fund counsel. Build a paper trail that's harder to erase than a lie. I thought of my years hunched over charts and monitors, seeing things come apart slowly, and I thought now I could teach people to stitch their seams tighter. So I painted, I filed, and I taught. I called it Small Revolutions, one legal workshop, one hotline, one neighbor who knew her rights. And each small revolution felt like a key not to a door someone could shut on me, but to dozens of doors I could open for others. They thought breaking me would be easy. They were wrong. They handed me the raw material for something better, not revenge for its own sake, but a quiet architecture of protection. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit like and subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just fiction, they're echoes of what too many people live through in silence. My name is Frances Delaney, and this was how I learned that peace isn't something others give you. You build it brick by brick the same way you once built a home. The next story, it's about a woman who discovers her sister's gift came with a contract she never signed. You won't want to miss it. This story isn't over.